The first time anyone noticed something was wrong, it was because the cows were gone. Not all at once, not dramatically. They simply thinned. Fields that had once looked like living carpets of black and white began to show more dirt than hide. Fences stretched across empty pasture. Water troughs sat untouched beneath a burning sky. The wind moved through tall grass without resistance. Yet in the cities, the restaurants multiplied. Golden signs glowing against concrete skylines, drive-thrus wrapping around blocks, new menu items advertised every month. Bigger patties, thicker stacks, unlimited supply, the slogan promised. The company was called Vastra, Vastra Foods International. They began as a small roadside stand decades ago, built by a man who believed speed was more important than flavor. By the time the founder died, the brand had swallowed continents. Their mascot was a smiling chef with oversized gloves and a permanently open grin. Children loved him. Adults trusted him. Investors worshipped him. And every burger was said to be 100% pasture-raised beef. But there were fewer pastures every year. Farmers complained quietly at first. They sold cattle to Vastra's processors. Then, one year, the contracts stopped. Vastra no longer needed local suppliers. They claimed to have secured vertical integration. Farmers asked what that meant. No one answered clearly. It meant they no longer needed cows. Still, the burgers never ran out. In the industrial outskirts of major cities, new facilities rose, windowless, concrete, cold, each labeled with sterile names: Protein Unit 7, Protein Unit 12, Protein Unit 31. Inside, the lights never turned off. Trucks arrived after midnight. No livestock trailers, no sound of animals, just sealed containers backed into loading bays under heavy surveillance. Workers signed lifetime confidentiality agreements. Many of them were migrants, temporary labor, people who did not ask questions. The ones who did were replaced. The public saw none of this. They saw advertisements. They saw families laughing under fluorescent lights. They saw influencers biting into glossy patties while sauce dripped down their fingers. They saw the slogan, "We feed the world." And perhaps that was true, because the world was beginning to feed itself. In the southern districts of one coastal city, a pattern emerged. Homeless encampments cleared overnight. Authorities blamed relocation programs. Shelters reported missing guests. No investigations followed. The disappearances were small enough to ignore. One here, two there. Statistics absorbed them. Meanwhile, Vastra opened 3 new urban distribution centers within those same districts: Protein Unit 44, Protein Unit 45, Protein Unit 46. Inside Unit 45, a supervisor named Daniel worked the night shift. He had taken the job because it paid more than the slaughterhouse he previously worked at. But this facility had no animals, no carcasses, no smell of manure. Instead, everything arrived pre-processed, sealed, tagged, labeled only as Alt Protein Category H. Daniel never saw a cow enter the building. He never heard a single moo. Yet the grinders ran constantly. Massive industrial augers turning flesh into uniform pink paste. The paste moved along conveyors into portioning machines. The machines pressed it into perfect circles, identical, weight precise to the gram, every patty the same. He told himself it was lab-grown, synthetic meat, advanced technology. He told himself many things, until the night the container door malfunctioned. It arrived at 2:13 a.m., container H78219. The forklift operator backed it into Bay 6. When the hydraulic door lifted, it jammed halfway. Daniel walked over to assist. He pressed the override. The door shuddered upward, and the cold hit him first. Then the smell. Not livestock, not pork,
not poultry, something metallic, something faintly sweet. Inside the container were vacuum-sealed bundles, long, narrow, arranged too neatly, each labeled with barcodes, each tagged donor material, cleared. Donor. He told himself it meant laboratory donors, stem cell cultures, bioengineered tissue. He told himself not to think about the shape of the bundles. He told himself not to notice the faint outline beneath the plastic, a curve like a shoulder, a length like a thigh. He did not sleep after that shift. The next week, Daniel stopped coming to work. Human Resources listed him as voluntarily resigned. No forwarding address, no severance dispute. Just gone. The grinders did not stop. The restaurants did not close, and customers continued to bite into hot, salted patties without hesitation. Because the human mind protects itself from certain thoughts. It rejects the unbearable. It chooses convenience over horror. The company released a press statement that year celebrating record output. Despite global livestock decline, they said, our innovation ensures abundance. Livestock decline. The words barely registered in headlines. But in rural counties, old ranchers stared at empty fields and wondered how abundance was possible without cattle. Some of them drove past Vastra's distribution centers late at night. They saw trucks arriving without logos, without refrigeration units typical for beef transport. The trucks stayed exactly 19 minutes, then left lighter. Always lighter. Inside corporate headquarters, executives spoke of sustainability, population growth, resource optimization. One presentation slide contained a single sentence: protein is protein. No one in the boardroom asked what that meant, because profits had never been higher. In cities across the world, Vastra introduced a new product, the Titan Stack. 4 patties, double sauce, marketed as primal indulgence. Commercials showed people closing their eyes in ecstasy while biting down. One commercial lingered slightly longer on the chewing, on the satisfaction, on the idea of consumption. Sales exploded. Meanwhile, national missing persons databases continued to update quietly in the background of society. Runaways, undocumented workers, the isolated, the forgotten. Most cases closed themselves through time. No body, no evidence, no closure. Just absence. In Protein Unit 52, a janitor named Elena worked evenings. She never touched the production floor. She cleaned offices, restrooms, break rooms. But one night she entered a restricted hallway when a door was left ajar. The hallway led to a temperature-controlled chamber, unlike the others. Inside were not grinders, not presses, but tables, metal tables, drainage channels, overhead articulated arms, precision cutting instruments. On a clipboard she read the words, full breakdown, maintain structural yield. Structural, not anatomical. Structural. She did not return the next night. Her badge deactivated automatically. Vastra announced expansion into 3 new countries that quarter. Their slogan evolved, "We are the future of food." And perhaps they were, because cattle populations continued to fall. Climate change, water scarcity, land conversion. Reports confirmed the numbers publicly. There were simply not enough cows to support global burger consumption. Yet the supply chain never faltered, never slowed, never apologized. And somewhere deep within Unit 45's sublevel, a floor not listed on blueprints, a new shipment was logged under Category H. Urban acquisition, decentralized, donor verified. The grinders began again. Above ground, families laughed beneath red and yellow signs. Children unwrapped paper from steaming sandwiches. Teenagers gathered after school. Workers grabbed quick dinners on their commute home. No one asked where abundance came from, because abundance is comforting, because hunger is ancient, because the idea that the system could turn inward, that it could begin consuming the very population it served, was too monstrous to entertain. And so the chain grew, and the cows kept disappearing, and the trucks kept arriving after midnight, and the meat never ran out. This is only the beginning.
The complaints began as whispers, not about taste, not about sickness, about texture. Customers described it differently. Too smooth, too uniform, too soft in the center, yet fibrous at the edges. Food bloggers argued it was advanced processing. Nutrition forums debated whether synthetic protein could replicate muscle density so perfectly. Vostra responded with cheerful transparency campaigns, videos of happy farms, green pastures, slow-motion shots of cattle under golden sunlight. But the farms in those videos were rented. The cattle were leased for filming. The locations were temporary. The footage recycled across regions. In the real countryside, auctions closed early. Generational ranches sold land to solar developers. Veterinary suppliers went bankrupt. Slaughterhouses reduced staff. Government agricultural data showed the national herd at its lowest level in 70 years. Yet Vostra announced record-breaking quarterly meat output. Economists called it efficiency, supply chain mastery, technological leap. No one publicly asked how biological decline produced industrial expansion. Inside Protein Unit 45, after Daniel's disappearance, a new supervisor arrived. Her name was Corinne Vale. Corporate loyal, MBA, precision-minded. She did not question Category H. She had signed documents before she ever saw the floor. Documents describing alternative urban biomass recovery. She understood it as waste reclamation. She believed in sustainability. Her first week, she toured Sub-Level 2. The door required 2 biometric scans. Beyond it, the air felt heavier. Not colder, heavier. The chamber stretched longer than expected. Stainless rails ran along the ceiling, but not like traditional slaughter lines. These rails were segmented, adjustable, designed for variance. Each station had articulated restraints, industrial saws, automated flensing units calibrated for smaller frames. She paused. The engineer beside her spoke calmly. Urban-sourced donor material arrives pre-identified. Structural efficiency improves with intact intake. Corinne nodded. She had read the briefings. Urban-sourced, donor, intact intake. Language could soften anything. At the end of the line, the processed material fed into grinders identical to those upstairs. Once reduced, nothing was distinguishable. Protein was protein. Later that month, Vostra launched a philanthropic campaign, Feeding Tomorrow. They donated millions of meals to disaster zones, war-torn regions, flooded coastlines. The public praised their generosity. Stock prices rose, and the Titan Stack became the best-selling burger in company history. Meanwhile, in the outer districts of several megacities, surveillance infrastructure quietly expanded. Public-private partnerships installed smart streetlights equipped with biometric scanners, AI-driven demographic mapping, predictive disappearance modeling. The stated goal was public safety, crime reduction, efficiency in emergency response. But the data flowed somewhere else, too. Into acquisition algorithms, into probability heat maps, into a system that identified individuals statistically unlikely to be reported missing. No fixed address, no immediate relatives, no financial footprint, low social trace density. The algorithm flagged them in amber. Field teams received coordinates. Vostra did not call them abductions. They called them recoveries. In Unit 31, a malfunction halted production for 3 hours. A grinder jammed. Maintenance staff opened the housing. Inside the mechanism, among homogenized tissue, they found something that had not fully broken down. A fragment. Small, white, curved, a molar. Production paused while compliance officers arrived. The fragment was removed, logged as contamination, disposed of in a sealed container marked dental anomaly. The grinder resumed within 90 minutes. No report left the building. No regulator inspected, because regulation had been outsourced years ago. Self-certification, efficiency over oversight. Across the country, independent ranchers organized protests. They demanded transparency. They questioned how imported beef volumes exceeded global export records. Vostra's spokesperson appeared on national television, calm, measured, smiling. Our protein sources are proprietary and innovative. We meet all safety standards. Rumors of unethical sourcing are misinformation spread by competitors threatened by progress. The interviewer nodded. Advertising revenue from Vostra accounted for 12% of the network's annual income. Questions softened. The story faded. But online, forums began compiling numbers. Amateur analysts cross-referenced livestock databases with burger sales estimates. The gap widened every year. Billions of patties unaccounted for. The conspiracy threads grew. Most were absurd. Aliens, lab-grown human clones, secret underground ranches. But hidden among them were quieter observations. Charts, statistical breakdowns, correlations between distribution hubs and disappearance clusters. Those posts were flagged, accounts suspended, content removed for harmful misinformation, and the system continued. In Sub-Level 2, Corinne began spending more time observing intake. She told herself it was operational diligence, quality assurance, but something had shifted. One shipment arrived damaged. The external refrigeration unit failed in transit. When the doors opened, condensation clouded the air. For a moment, just a moment, the form inside was visible without abstraction. A hand, fingers curled inward, skin pale under frost. She froze. The technician beside her did not. Structural intake variance. Proceed to full breakdown. The restraints engaged automatically. She watched as articulated arms descended, mechanical precision replacing hesitation. Metal met flesh. Within minutes, identity dissolved into sections, sections into fragments, fragments into paste, paste into uniform pink mass. The grinder erased the last resemblance. Upstairs, the paste joined thousands of kilograms from previous shipments, blended, seasoned, portioned, stacked, frozen, shipped. Across the city, families unwrapped dinner. Corinne did not resign. Instead, she began reviewing acquisition reports more closely. She noticed language tightening. Urban acquisition units now classified donors by traceability risk index. Green meant likely reported. Amber meant delayed report. Red meant statistically invisible. Red donors were prioritized, efficient, low noise. Some nights she stared at the screens displaying heat maps of human absence, red clusters glowing across districts where poverty pressed hardest. She wondered when the system had crossed from desperation into optimization, when meat shortage had become human harvest.
because it had started, she knew from archived documents, as emergency contingency, a pilot program during a severe livestock collapse, market panic, supply shock. Executives faced a choice: shrink or substitute. They substituted, quietly, temporarily, until profit margins stabilized. But temporary measures calcify, and profit never retreats willingly. Within 5 years, Category H accounted for 38% of total output. Within 8 years, it surpassed 60%. Cattle became supplementary, a marketing prop, a nostalgia piece. The real abundance flowed from cities, from streets, from statistical invisibility. And still, customers lined up, because hunger does not ask origin, because convenience overrides curiosity, because the burger tasted the same, perhaps better. Some consumers described it as richer, more complex. There were articles speculating about a new amino profile, enhanced umami. Addictive, food critics wrote. They were correct. Human muscle carries familiarity.
Familiarity, an evolutionary echo, the taste of self-recognition. By the 10th year of Category H integration, cattle herds reached historic lows. Environmentalists celebrated reduced methane emissions. Plant-based advocates claimed victory. Vastra quietly expanded sub-level operations globally. Urban acquisition units scaled through automated targeting. And in one city, just one, a transportation clerk noticed something strange. Truck manifests listed inbound cargo weights higher than outbound waste disposal records allowed. Mass in did not equal mass out. There was excess. He calculated repeatedly. The numbers implied something impossible, that intake volume exceeded recorded disappearance rates, which meant one of two things. Either the public data was wrong, or acquisition was no longer limited to the statistically invisible. He saved the spreadsheets to a private drive. 2 nights later, his apartment was empty, lease terminated, employment file marked voluntary departure. The trucks kept moving, the grinders kept turning, and under the glow of smiling signs, the world continued to feed. By year 12, no one remembered when the cattle began to disappear. Memory is short when convenience is long. Children growing up under Vastra's glowing arches had never seen a real slaughterhouse. They had never driven past herds packed against wire fencing. To them, meat was a product of buildings, of stainless steel, of branded paper wrappers folded precisely around warmth. The countryside had thinned. Satellite images showed former grazing land converted into logistics parks, data centers, battery farms. The old ranchers who once measured wealth in hooves now measured loss in silence. Fences rusted, barns leaned, wells dried. But the cities pulsed, and Vastra pulsed with them. New menu item, the Heritage Classic. Marketed as authentic ranch flavor, a nostalgic return to roots. Commercials featured aging cowboys smiling beside campfires. The irony went unnoticed. Inside Corporate Strategy Tower 3, an executive presentation displayed a graph no outsider would ever see. Livestock contribution, 21%. Category H contribution, 73%. Other alternative proteins, 6%. The room was quiet as the numbers settled. One board member asked the question gently, "Public exposure risk?" The chief risk officer answered without hesitation, "Statistically negligible. Acquisition models operate below national reporting thresholds. Cross-border sourcing dilutes regional clustering. cross-border. Because once the domestic system reached saturation, expansion became necessary. Urban acquisition units were deployed in megacities across continents. Displacement zones, refugee corridors, transit hubs where identity dissolved easily. No single country could see the whole pattern, and so no country saw it at all. In Unit 52, a new hire named Tomas lasted 17 days. He was 22, fresh from vocational training. He believed he was entering the future of sustainable protein. On day 18, he was assigned to Sub-Level 2 for the first time. They called it exposure training. The supervisor handed him a tablet. Observe, do not interfere. The shipment that arrived that night was marked Red Tier, high efficiency, low traceability. The container opened. Condensation rolled outward like breath. Tomas saw the outline immediately. Not bundled sections, whole forms, 3, secured in suspension harnesses, eyes covered, mouths sealed, movement minimal but present. He felt his body react before his mind processed. The supervisor's voice was calm. Urban donor recovery, legally cleared under municipal reclamation codes. Reclamation, as if people were abandoned furniture, as if they had forfeited ownership of their bodies by falling outside economic systems. The articulated arms descended. Tomas stepped backward. No. It escaped him quietly. The supervisor turned. If you cannot detach, you cannot remain. The first cut was swift, precision at the base of the skull, silence immediate. The system was engineered for efficiency, not cruelty. Cruelty was inefficient. Within minutes, identity fragmented. Within 30, nothing recognizable remained. Tomas vomited in the corner. His badge was deactivated the next morning. Exit interview classified as personal suitability mismatch. He did not speak publicly. Most who saw Sub-Level 2 did not. Because fear calcifies. Because disbelief isolates. Because even if you told someone, who would accept it? That their dinner was not cow, not pig, not plant, but neighbor, stranger, self. Meanwhile, Vostra launched a subscription program, automatic weekly deliveries, discount incentives for higher consumption tiers. Families could now receive bulk frozen patties directly to their homes. Consumption stabilized supply projections. Predictability improved acquisition scheduling. In the analytics department, algorithms refined target profiles. They learned. They adapted. Individuals with declining social network interactions rose in ranking. Those whose digital presence faded were flagged amber. Those whose devices stopped syncing regularly moved toward red. Isolation became harvestable. Loneliness became inventory. Across one coastal nation, investigative journalist forums began compiling anomalies, freight weight inconsistencies, unexplained warehouse expansions, disappearance clusters around logistics corridors. One anonymous post included a single photograph, a fragment recovered from an industrial drain outside Protein Unit 31, a partial mandible, human, dental fillings intact. The post circulated for 3 hours, then it vanished. The account deleted. Search engines suppressed cached copies. Vastra's public relations team issued a statement about malicious digital fabrications. Stock price rose 4% that day. Investors appreciated decisive response. Inside Strategy Tower 3, the chief operations architect proposed Phase 4, automation of full intake, removal of human supervisors from Sub-Level 2. Emotional leakage presents inefficiency risk. Machines do not hesitate. Machines do not moralize. Machines optimize yield.
The vote passed unanimously. Construction began on deeper facilities, sub-level 3, designed without windows, without break rooms, without hesitation. At the same time, cattle populations reached historic collapse. Agricultural reports called it irreversible. Climate volatility, water depletion, pathogen cycles. Traditional beef production would not recover. Vastra held a press conference. "We anticipated this transition years ago. Our innovation ensures humanity never faces protein scarcity." The word humanity echoed oddly in the room. No one in attendance noticed. Or perhaps they did and chose silence, because to question abundance is to risk losing it, and humanity fears hunger more than it fears truth. In sub-level 3, the first fully automated breakdown occurred without witness. No supervisor, no trainee, only sensors, actuators, blades calibrated to anatomical precision. The intake registered 82 kilograms. Output matched projected yield within 0.4%. A success. The system scaled. Urban acquisition units increased frequency. Red-tier donors no longer limited to statistically invisible populations. Algorithmic expansion recalibrated acceptable noise thresholds. A slight increase in missing persons would be absorbed by urban churn. Society is large. Absence diffuses. In one city, a teacher named Alina began noticing empty desks accumulating faster than transfer paperwork justified. Students withdrawn without records, families unreachable, apartments vacated overnight. She reported concerns to local authorities. Authorities cited relocation programs, economic migration, no foul play suspected. Weeks later, her own apartment lease was flagged for termination due to zoning redevelopment. She had never missed rent. She had no relocation notice, but redevelopment is flexible when data marks you amber. The night her building lost power, an unmarked vehicle idled at the curb. Inside, 2 technicians reviewed her profile. Low social media footprint, minimal extended family, single occupant residence. Amber, trending red. Efficiency rating acceptable. The decision took 12 seconds. Across the street, a Vastra bin board glowed above them. "We feed the future." Alina never reached sub-level 3 consciously. Sedation protocols optimized transport. By morning, her desk at school was cleared. Students were told she transferred unexpectedly. The grinder absorbed the rest. Weeks later, a child bit into a Titan stack and smiled. Flavor consistent, texture uniform, perfect. By year 15, cattle were ceremonial. Vastra maintained a handful of ranches for media tours. Executives walked journalists through controlled environments where docile animals grazed under curated sunlight. Photographs circulated globally, proof of authenticity. Meanwhile, Category H surpassed 85% of total production. Internal memos no longer used the word donor.
They used primary source. Language evolves with comfort. In Strategy Tower 3, one analyst ran a projection. At current acquisition rates, urban population growth offset intake loss, but the margin narrowed. Human supply was not infinite. Eventually, consumption could outpace replenishment. The irony did not escape him. A food chain consuming its own customer base. He drafted a cautionary memo. Subject: long-term sustainability risk. The memo never left his outbox. Access revoked before submission. He received a generous severance package, relocated, non-disclosure extended indefinitely, and the chain continued.
because once a system learns it can survive by consuming the very society it serves, it does not easily return to restraint, because profit does not retreat, because hunger does not ask origin, because the taste is familiar, because somewhere, deep in the architecture of the species, the boundary between self and sustenance is thinner than we admit, and under glowing signs in every city, the line wrapped around the block.
By year 18, the taste had become unmistakable, not publicly, not consciously, but somewhere beneath language. Customers described Vostra's meat as comforting, as weirdly nostalgic, as something that felt like home. Flavor scientists wrote white papers praising the company's ability to replicate the complexity of mammalian muscle at scale. Competitors failed repeatedly to match it. Plant-based alternatives tasted flat beside it. Lab-grown tissue lacked density. Vostra's patties carried something else, an echo. Inside sub-level 3, automation eliminated hesitation entirely. The system no longer processed whole forms for long. Efficiency improved when segmentation began during transport. Mobile intake units performed preliminary reduction. By the time primary source material reached central facilities, it was already anonymized, already less than human, already inventory. Urban acquisition units expanded their criteria quietly. Red tier had once meant statistically invisible. Now it included statistically inconvenient. Whistleblowers, independent auditors, data journalists, those who noticed discrepancies in livestock reporting, those who mapped missing persons clusters too precisely. Disappearance, once opportunistic, became preventative. Vostra did not frame it as violence, it framed it as containment of misinformation, brand stability protection. In Strategy Tower 3, the board reviewed a troubling metric. Per capita consumption was rising faster than projected. Customers were not just returning, they were increasing frequency. Average visits per week climbed from 1.3 to 2.1 in under 4 years. Addictive response patterns appeared in consumer behavior data. Repeat cravings intensified within 48 hours of intake. Neurochemical analysis of primary source protein revealed elevated concentrations of specific amino compounds. Compounds correlated with reward circuitry stimulation. Human muscle, when consumed, triggered recognition pathways older than agriculture, older than civilization, an ancestral signal. The board did not panic. They leaned forward. Demand growth meant market dominance. The only constraint was supply, and supply was urban. In several megacities, something subtle shifted. Not enough to dominate headlines, but enough to alter atmosphere. Streets once crowded late into the night thinned slightly earlier. Community centers reported declining attendance. Transient populations became more transient. People moved without telling neighbors. Tenants vanished between rent cycles. Municipal databases recorded upticks in unresolved absence. Still within acceptable variance, still ignorable, except in one district. District 11 had 3 Vastra distribution hubs within a 2-mile radius. It also showed a disappearance rate 340% above national average. An independent statistician named Rahim published the correlation on a small academic forum. He did not accuse, he simply overlaid maps. Hub density, absence density, a near-perfect match. The post gained traction slowly, then rapidly. Within 24 hours, it was archived, mirrored, translated. Within 36 hours, Rahim's university placed him on administrative leave for data integrity review.
Within 48 hours, his apartment was found empty, laptop missing, phone powered down permanently. The forum thread was replaced with a notice about misleading statistical interpretations, but the maps lingered in private drives. Screenshots circulated through encrypted channels. A rumor began to form, not about cattle, not about synthetic meat, but about proximity. People started asking a new question. Why are there so many distribution centers in low-income neighborhoods? Vastra responded by announcing community revitalization initiatives, scholarships, job fairs, food donations. They painted murals on warehouse walls, bright colors, smiling mascots. Underneath the paint, sub-level 3 expanded. Automation reached near total capacity. Primary source intake surpassed 92% of production. Cattle ranches were quietly sold. Livestock imagery removed from internal branding. In one rural county, the last independent slaughterhouse closed. Its owner, a man in his 70s, gave a local interview before shutting the doors. "There's no cows left," he said, "but somehow there's more burgers than ever." The clip aired once. It was never replayed. Inside sub-level 3, a systems engineer noticed something odd in yield reports. Structural efficiency from primary source material exceeded bovine benchmarks by 17%. Less waste, more uniform density, higher protein retention. Humans were simply better meat.
Humans were simply better meat. The engineer did not think the sentence in horror. He thought it in metrics, in percentages, in yield curves rising cleanly above historical baselines. Primary source required less trimming, produced less unusable mass, integrated into the grinding systems with fewer mechanical faults. The machines preferred it. He stared at comparative charts long after his shift ended. Bovine tissue showed variability, fat ratios inconsistent, connective tissue unpredictable, bone density requiring recalibration. Primary source processed like it had been designed for industry. Muscle groups proportioned evenly, fat marbling balanced, structural symmetry ideal for automated disassembly. Evolution had optimized the human body for endurance. Vastra had optimized it for conversion. He minimized the window, but the thought remained. If the system favored this input so dramatically, would it ever return to cattle, even if herds recovered? The answer was mathematical. No. Efficiency becomes doctrine. Doctrine becomes inevitability. That same week, sub-level 3 activated Phase 3 automation. Mobile intake units were no longer required to deliver intact forms. Field processing now began at acquisition. Neural suppression, rapid segmentation, vacuum preservation. Transport weight reduced by 11%, decomposition risk minimized. Humanity dissolved before arrival. The engineer walked the observation corridor above Processing Bay 7. Through reinforced glass, he watched articulated arms move in perfect choreography. Blade arcs synchronized with conveyor speed, hydraulic clamps adjusting automatically to limb variance. The system hummed, not loudly, but constantly, a mechanical heartbeat. He noticed something else in the logs, repeat markers, biometric identifiers recycled through loyalty databases. The biometric registration program had been sold as convenience, faster checkout, personalized coupons. But fingerprint data allowed pre-classification. Green-tier consumers could now be profiled by isolation probability trends. A drop in transaction frequency, a decline in social engagement metrics,
a pause in salary deposits. Amber crept into green quietly. Consumers were becoming predictive inventory. The engineer zoomed out on intake projections. If acquisition expanded into low-density green clusters, supply would stabilize for decades. If not, saturation risk remained. He drafted a simulation. What if loyalty program participants were gradually phased into intake rotation based on diminishing engagement? A closed ecosystem, consumption predicting harvest, harvest sustaining consumption. The projection stabilized long-term supply curves elegantly. He felt cold, not from fear, from clarity. The system did not require malice, only optimization. In District 11, storefronts shuttered one by one, not dramatically, just fewer lights at night. A barber shop closed without notice, a laundromat replaced by a mural, a daycare center located. People noticed the silence before they noticed the absence. Footsteps echoed longer on sidewalks. Street vendors packed up earlier. Even stray dogs seemed fewer. Local news framed it as economic transition, urban migration patterns. But one detail unsettled viewers who paid attention. Every closed block sat within walking distance of a Vastra hub. Meanwhile, in wealthier districts, new flagship restaurants opened. Glass walls, open kitchens, transparent branding. Customers could watch patties sizzle on stainless grills, see nothing hidden, because nothing recognizable remained by that stage. The blending process erased distinction. All primary source became uniform, a global sameness. Taste identical in every country. Consistency was power. In sub-level 3, the engineer received a private message from an unlisted internal address. One sentence. "You've seen the ratios." He froze. The message vanished after 30 seconds. No sender trace, no reply option. But the next day, he found an encrypted file waiting in his secure folder. Inside were historical documents from the earliest days of Category H, pilot program notes, emergency memos during the livestock collapse year, executives debating the ethics of temporary substitution. The original projection had assumed less than 5% integration, only until cattle herds stabilized. But profits surged during the trial phase, margins widened, waste dropped, addiction metrics improved. Temporary became permanent within 18 months. There was a recording attached, an early board meeting. One voice stood out, calm, measured. If we can feed the world without cows, we are no longer constrained by land. The only scalable protein source left is ourselves. Laughter followed, nervous, then contemplative, then accepting. The engineer closed the file. He understood now that the system had never drifted into cannibalism accidentally. It had evaluated it, modeled it, chosen it. In another city across the ocean, biometric loyalty enrollment surpassed 82% of customers. Facial recognition at kiosks eliminated cashiers entirely. Every transaction tied to identity, identity tied to data, data tied to predictive models, and predictive models tied to acquisition scheduling. The first green tier intake occurred without announcement. A mid-level accountant, stable job, few close relationships. Biometric data showed declining restaurant visits, projected disengagement risk. Acquisition probability recalculated. He disappeared during a late commute. Police filed a routine report. Adult male, no signs of struggle, case pending.
His fingerprint remained active in Vastra's loyalty database. 2 weeks later, his biometric ID registered a purchase at a downtown location because his protein was processed, his loyalty ID used to simulate continued engagement. Data continuity preserved, no red flags. In Strategy Tower 3, executives reviewed engagement metrics with satisfaction. Consumption rates showed no decline despite minor urban thinning. In fact, in some districts, sales increased as populations shrank. Fewer people, more burgers per person. Demand was not weakening, it was concentrating. The system was teaching the population to eat more as neighbors vanished. Subtle psychological reinforcement, abundance signaling safety, safety driving appetite, appetite driving intake. In District 11, a former community organizer named Lila began keeping a notebook. She wrote down names of those who disappeared, dates, last known locations, distances from Vastra hubs. The pattern felt too sharp to ignore. She printed Rahim's archived map, drew circles around the 3 hubs, overlaid her handwritten absences. The match tightened. She did not publish online. She did not trust networks anymore. Instead, she began speaking quietly to families, whispers in stairwells, conversations at bus stops. Have you noticed? Most had. None wanted to say it aloud, because saying it would mean something impossible, that the smiling chain feeding their children might also be thinning their streets. One night, Lila stood outside Protein Unit 45 as trucks reversed into loading bays. She counted 6 arrivals between midnight and 1 a.m. No livestock trailers, no animal noise, just sealed containers. She recorded license plates. The next morning, she found her notebook missing from her kitchen table. Door locked, windows sealed, no signs of forced entry. Her biometric loyalty app pinged her phone at noon. Exclusive offer, double rewards today. She deleted the app. Across the globe, sub-level 3 facilities synchronized production schedules. Global primary source integration reached 94%. Cattle herds became ceremonial marketing
props. Most were quietly euthanized and processed as nostalgia products. The Heritage Classic was discontinued. Consumers did not notice. Flavor profiles remained consistent because the flavor had never depended on cattle. Inside the engineer's apartment, he replayed the old board recording. The only scalable protein source left is ourselves. He realized something else. The system required anonymity to function. As long as individuals felt isolated in their suspicions, acquisition could expand. But if proximity awareness crossed a certain threshold, if enough people connected hub density to absence density, demand might fracture, consumption might slow, and supply would destabilize. He opened a secure channel, not to regulators, not to media, but to every archived copy of Rahim's maps he could find. He attached his yield charts, his automation logs, his simulation projections. He added a single line, "It's not cattle." He hit send. Across encrypted networks, files began replicating, small at first, then multiplying. The maps reappeared, this time with production ratios attached, with intake percentages, with predictive harvest models. For the first time, the rumor gained mass. Not absurdity, not alien theory, but data, cold, structured, indisputable. And in Strategy Tower 3, for the first time in 18 years, demand projections flickered downward, because awareness spreads faster than hunger once it begins.
The arches came down slowly, not in fire, not in explosions, but in silence. Restaurants closed one by one. Distribution hubs locked their gates. Sub-level 3 fell quiet. For 18 years, the grinders had hummed without pause. For 18 years, absence had been inventory, loneliness had been supply, and hunger had been weaponized. The system did not collapse because of outrage. It collapsed because of arithmetic, because someone counted, because someone overlaid maps, because someone realized the numbers of cows were falling while the burgers kept multiplying, because someone finally said, "It's not cattle." When the data flooded the world, the illusion shattered. Primary source, 94%. Urban acquisition, biometric targeting, a food chain that had folded inward, humanity consuming itself while smiling beneath glowing signs. The executives were arrested, the facilities seized, the trucks stopped moving after midnight. But what lingered was not the scandal, it was the realization. The system had not hidden in darkness, it had hidden in convenience. It had hidden in appetite. It had hidden in our refusal to ask where abundance comes from when scarcity surrounds us. Years later, the fields are still recovering. Communities track their missing more carefully. Biometric loyalty programs are met with suspicion, and every time a corporation promises infinite abundance in a finite world, someone remembers Vostra. Because the most terrifying horror was never the blades, it was optimization without conscience. It was profit without boundary. It was the moment humanity became scalable protein, and no one noticed until the numbers were louder than the hunger. If this story unsettled you, that was the point. This is Noxhour, where we explore the darkness behind systems, the silence behind statistics, the horror hidden in plain sight. If you made it to the end, you're already asking better questions. Subscribe, stay aware, and remember, when something promises endless abundance, always ask what it's feeding on. I'll see you in the next descent.